guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing another custom dragon. Last time we did a moon dragon and you guys really liked it, so I figured we'd do the same thing and make another two-part series. So today we are going to be sculpting the clay pieces and painting them, and then tomorrow we're going to be doing all the sewing and putting everything together to finish the dragon. So my idea for this dragon is a treasure dragon. I wanted it to be kind of a desert type creature that likes to dig in the sand and maybe hide coins. So we're going to be basing it off of a lot of more desert type reptiles. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so I think I'm going to start on the clay head first, and then we'll move on to making all the feet. And so like always with my clay heads, I'm going to start off with a large lump of tinfoil. I have it roughly shaped into the size of the head that I want. This guy's going to be very bulbous and large, so he's got a big head, and I'm going to start covering this completely in clay. Again, this dragon is going to be a chubby boy. I want a lot of his features to be just kind of short, stocky, and thick, and I'm kind of basing him mainly off of a species of lizard known as the Uromastax. I think I'm saying that correct. I'm really bad at pronouncing things, so if I'm saying it wrong, here's it on the screen so you guys can look it up. The reason I went with this reptile species is because I wanted to do a completely different body style than we did with the moon dragon. The moon dragon was really thin and lengthy, and I wanted to do something kind of more stocky and thick. Plus, the theme of our dragon is going to be treasure, and I thought it'd be cool to pick something that would be in the sand and more desert-like. One thing that I did to help make his head look a little bit larger than it actually is was to use a lot of smaller details. So a lot of his features, other than his mouth, are going to be a lot smaller than they probably would for a head this size. A good example of this is the eyes. I ended up going with a very small type eye. I think these are only 12 millimeters. I'm not 100% sure. Normally I get 12 or 16 millimeter eyes for my creatures. Every now and again I'll go to an 8 millimeter, but that's something that's really tiny. So after I got the eyes in place, I decided that I wanted to put some ridges under and above them to kind of make the eyes look slightly sunken in, and to make his head look a little less round because it was starting to look too bulbous. So I laid those ridges out, I made sure to smooth everything, I got my tools, and I made the line work for where the mouth is going to go, just a basic guide, and then I started on adding some scale texture. So I started the scaling around the eyes with really tiny little wrinkly marks, and then I kind of worked my way out from there. One other thing that I decided to do to add a bit of a fantasy twist was to actually add an extra set of nostrils. I just thought it kind of fit the face a little bit better to have an extra pair, and I thought it was a little funny. So I added those nostrils, and then I continued on the scale work. To help frame the eyes, I decided to go with a larger scaling going around the ridges just to make them look like they stand out a bit, and then most of the other features except for the scales around the lips are going to be very tiny kind of textural scales. One thing that I really like doing now to make scales, since I got a new set for sculpting, I ended up getting a bunch of dotting tools, and I like using these now to make kind of a softer scale pattern. One thing that I thought would be really cool would be to add some gold to this piece, but I don't have actual gold, obviously, don't have that type of money, but I wanted to add a kind of crown piece to it, and I thought I'd make it really organic, so I got this lump of false gold, and I just pushed it right on the forehead. So it's kind of like a very organic version of a crown. And then I just took little balls of clay and I started adding larger scales to frame this and his cheeks. After that, I added the scale texture to his lips, and then I just kind of roughed up the texture of his chin. I cleaned up the edges around the base of his head, and I think we're basically done right now. I really like how this is looking, so I'm going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about, 45-55 minutes. He's pretty large, so I want to make sure to bake all the way through. Anyways, while we have the clay head baking, I'm going to start on the clay feet. So obviously for our clay feet we need a wire frame, so I have these all set up for the front and back. Now, of course, to go along with his body type, which is going to be short and stocky and a desert type creature, we're going to make sure that his toes are a little bit shorter, but we're going to also make sure that his feet look wide enough and shovel-like enough to where he could actually dig in the sand. Because I don't want to give him little stubby toes and not be able to dig, because the whole point of him is he likes to bury his treasure. Anyways, the first thing that we need to do is add a lump of clay to the very middle of our wire frame where all the wires connect, and then we need to add some claws to the piece. So we're going to add a little bit of clay to the end of each wire, and then we're just going to roughly shape it. I want his claws to be kind of large, and I think if I go with a large enough claw, we could kind of make his toes look shorter than they actually are. Kind of another illusional thing that we did with the eyes. Anyways, we're going to be pre-baking this after we get all the claws on, so we're going to put it in the oven for about 25 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit, and then once it's done baking and is cool to touch, we can start adding more clay to the frame. So the next thing that we need to start doing is adding clay to the bottoms of his feet, so I'm going to take strips of clay and just cover up the bottoms of all the wires, and then blend everything together. Now, the bottoms of the feet you're not going to really notice too much, so you don't have to add a lot of detail, but I do like to add a little bit of texture or wrinkles to it to make them look a little bit less flat. And then after we have everything covered, smoothed out, and we like how the bottom of the foot looks, we're going to put this in the oven again, 275 Fahrenheit for another 25 minutes. And then after it's done baking for the second time, we can start on the tops of the feet and finishing them up. So for the tops of the feet, we're going to be basically doing the same thing that we did with the bottoms of the feet, and we're just going to take strips of clay and cover everything up. The only thing different is I'm going to be using a little bit thicker strips of clay to cover the toes, that way I have this portion lift up a little bit more. I'm going to get everything covered, we're going to get this blended into the rest of the clay that's already baked, and then we're going to start adding some texture to this and refining the shape of the toes. And then one last thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to add a little bit of a gem to each foot, so we're going to be putting a glass gem right at the very top of the foot. So I'm going to push this in, clean up the edges, and then add a scaling texture around it. And then I think we're basically done with the front feet, and then for the back feet we basically have to do the same thing, it's just shaped slightly different, the toes are in different places and stuff like that, but again, it's basically the same thing, it's just going to look a little bit different. Oh, and of course the last bake for our feet, we have to put them in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 minutes. Okay, so we have all of our clay feet done, they've been baked, they're cooled, and now we can start on the painting. So I'm going to start with the head first, and the first thing that I need to do is I'm going to primer it. So I'm going to start with just a basic light brown, kind of a khaki color, but it's a lot darker than khaki, and I'm just going to go over the whole head. Now I am going to be adding a lot of golds to this, but of course that's going to be added after we get the actual color down. After our first layer of brown is down, we're going to start adding some shadows, so we're going to start adding black to the corners and cracks around the eyes, mouth, just anything that's kind of indented. We want it to look a little bit darker than the outer portion of the face. That way it looks a bit more sunken in. And then after we have our shadows in place, we can start adding our details. So I'm going to start with the large scales that are on the sides of the face, and I think I want these to be a gray, that way they kind of stand out from everything else. Because I think the rest of the body is going to be all gold, so I kind of want to have just a random color to give it a little bit more detail and to just make it look a little bit more realistic. Kind of like a way of giving him camouflage, like his body looks like sand and maybe the gray scales that we add to him looks like just scattered rocks. I don't know, I just thought it'd be kind of cool. So I'm going to get those painted up, I'm going to let them dry, and then we're going to start adding our gold paints. Now I'm actually not just using a gold shimmery paint, I'm also using bronzes, coppers, just anything very similar, that way we can have different tones of gold. And then one thing that I did to kind of make a few of the features stand out is I made those a brighter gold. So a lot paler, more shimmery gold is going to be kind of on the ridges and the scales around the mouth. I kind of wanted those features to stand out more, and I figured a lighter color would work well for that. And then the rest of the face is kind of closer in tone to a bronze or a copper. And then the last little bit of painting that I did was I added white highlights here and there, kind of to help make it look like some of the scales are a bit more shiny, and then I went around the eyes to kind of define those as well. So I figured just a little bit of a highlight around the eyes would make them look a bit brighter and not too sunken in. I wanted it to look sunken in around the eye, but not the actual eye itself. And of course, after all of my paint has dried, I had to clean up all the paint that got on the glass eyes, so I scraped that off. And the one thing that I wanted to do was I had some more glitter. I wanted to add a little bit of a hint of a orange kind of color, similar to the gems that we put on the feet. I wanted something on the head, and I actually had a glitter that almost matches those gems. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay out a little bit of glue on one of the scales on each side of the face. We're going to lay that glue out, and then I'm going to sprinkle glitter all over that. And then once that's dried, we can shake off all the excess glitter. Okay, so I think after that we're finally done with the head. Now we can start painting the feet. So we're going to be basically doing the same thing that we did with the head with the feet. So we're going to start off with the same primer. We're going to get everything completely covered and dried, and then we're going to start adding some shadows in between the toes. So we're just going to add a little bit of black and blend that out, make sure we have a bit of a shadow between the toes. Once that's dried, we can add our golds and stuff and go over this to kind of brighten it up and add a bit more shimmer. Now for the golds, I think the top of the foot I want a bit brighter and the tips of the toes, so the actual toes themselves are going to be kind of a little bit darker than the rest of the foot. And then I want to throw in a little bit of gray, so right around those wrinkles that kind of frame the toes, I'm going to go over those with the gray that we used for the scales in the face. I'm going to go back and brighten up the tips of the toes just a little bit more, and then we're going to paint our claws. For the claws, I still want them to be shimmery like the rest of the body, so I'm going to be using my metallics for that, but I'm going to be using more of a darker black color for this, just so they stand out a bit more. And then after that, I'm going to let everything dry, and then I can go back and clean up those gems that we have on the base of the foot. So we're just going to peel off the paint and we're basically done. So I did that to the front feet, and then the back feet, just like with the sculpting, everything is the same, just everything is in different spots. So we're going to do all the painting exactly the same, it's just going to look slightly different because of the shape. So after our painting is done, we're going to let everything dry. I'm going to mix up some resin and I'm going to paint this over all of the painting that we did to help protect it, kind of like an extra layer of protection, and this is going to have to cure overnight. Okay guys, I think that's it for today's video. We ended up doing all the clay pieces and the painting, and tomorrow we're going to do the sewing and putting everything together, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!